Hello everyone and welcome to Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. Today we will be talking about smuggled gold, gold of contraband found in a mysterious shipwreck. So let's dive into it. In the year 2000, we found in the island of Mozambique a shipwreck called the Espada. And I have mentioned the Espada in other episodes because it had a beautiful cargo of Chinese porcelain. I will make a video just for the Espada because the quality and the beauty of this porcelain deserve a video by itself. But the story of the smuggled gold starts with the Espada, with the finding of the Espada. When we found that wreck and we started exploring around the wreck, because the first thing you have to do when you find a wreck is to understand the context of the wreck, what it has around, which kind of objects will have in the vicinity, how is the dispersion of the material of the wreck, so you can properly plan an excavation. So we were exploring in the vicinity of the Espadarte and we came across two ballast piles, like another two wrecks, but really close to the Espadarte, really nearby. I'm talking about probably one was about 38 meters away, which is very close, and the other ballast pile was about 50 some meters away. So we are talking about one wreck, one identified wreck, the Espadarte, and two ballast piles really close by. Our first idea or first hypothesis was that the ship, when it sank, it broke up and spilled ballast stones in three places because the force of the waves in that place is quite strong sometimes, and the current as well. And then we thought, okay, the ship broke up in three pieces, and this is the three ballast piles we are seeing. Well, when we started investigating those ballast piles to see if we can connect them with the Espadarte or not, we realized that under each of these ballast piles there was wood structure as well, and both had remains of the keel of the ship. What happened with that? That every ship has only one keel, so it can only be that we have three wrecks in a very close vicinity. This is very unusual. You don't find that very often. I mean, in an area which is less than 100 meters, to have three shipwrecks is really something not that common. So we were really surprised by this finding, and we started imagine the possibility of contamination of the artifacts of each wreck in three wrecks so close one to another. It is very high. You can expect that artifacts from one wreck will be in the area together with the artifacts of the other wreck. This in the archaeological research makes it a little bit complicated because what you want to understand is one wreck at the time. This thing of the three wrecks together with artifacts all mixed, it was a really bit daunting for us. And we started investigating these two ballast piles as well together at the same time with the Espadarte.
Sorry to interrupt, but because I can imagine that you have hypothesis right away. Like, if you find three wreck sites right next to each other, what's your first thoughts? Would it be like, oh, they must have sunken in battle at the same time? Or what's the first knee-jerk reaction?
This is a place which is very difficult for navigation. This is the entry of the channel to the bay in Mozambique, in the island of Mozambique. The channel is very narrow, the currents there are very strong, and you have there sometimes crosswinds. For us in our expedition ship to go inside to the bay of the island of Mozambique, it was sometimes difficult depending on the current and the predominant winds at the moment. It was sometimes difficult, and this is a ship with a motor, with an engine, with a propeller. So imagine doing that on sail with big
sails.
ships,
Yeah.
which were heavy and a little bit bulky and difficult to maneuver.
Yeah.
So yes, it is an area that for navigation is complicated. So the first thing is like, well, three guys they got bad luck here and they ended up almost one on top of the other because it's a difficult place to navigate. That was the first idea. But okay, then we continue the exploration of these ballast piles, and in one of them, the one further to the west, the one further to the west, in the exploration of the ballast stones to see, because also the ballast stones, we have already seen that there was remains of wood, but at the same time, the ballast stones were slightly different one from another, meaning that yes, there must be different ships. And in this exploration, we really stumble on a gold ingot on top of the ballast of this ballast pile that was further to the west. How that plays a role here? This is the information, that's why in archaeological research you have to record all the information you can. Then you don't know if you will use it or not, but you have to record it in the moment. This gold ingot was found on top of the ballast. Well, I'm talking about something like this. It's like a small disc of 600 grams, very heavy, because gold is very heavy. And it was on top of the rocks, on top of the ballast stones. So we were totally surprised because in the first explorations of a wreck, it's very unusual that you find already artifacts or things from the wreck. Those are normally under the ground and you have to excavate and you have to do a lot of stuff before finding the first artifacts of the wreck. But suddenly you have a piece of gold of 600 grams, very heavy and like half shining already. And we have talked about that in other wrecks as well. Well, here in Mozambique, we had that situation again. And
I mean, that is a good way to kickstart finding something. Like seeing the first artifact to be shiny gold is not that bad to kickstart the
well, that certainly gives the team an extra push because, yeah, you find when you are in an area that potential for shipwrecks, you find several shipwrecks and some of them are really boring. I mean, you find the ballast stones, you start making your exploration of the site and you end up finding nothing. So imagine when the first thing that you find is a big piece of gold. Everyone got super excited and said, okay, let's investigate this one more. So
let's pack it up, we're done.
Job is finished. Well, with that information that this piece of gold, this gold ingot was on top of the ballast, it was important later on when we tried to figure out or to understand where the gold came from. And we started exploring all this area. Remember that I mentioned that these three wrecks, because now there are not anymore ballast piles, there are three wrecks, the Espada and another two, very close one to another. And the area in the middle of this small triangle, let's call it this way, because it was the three wrecks are really close. So in this triangle in the middle, we are talking about in high tide, about 4 meters of depth. In low tide, this is almost dry. And the seabed in that area that we were exploring, it is flat like a road, like a highway. It is flat rock, but really flat to the point that is with the currents that are there, it's very difficult to dive because you cannot grab yourself to anything. There is no...
I was about to ask if it's super flat because the currents are really big and really strong. And yeah, that's probably also why you don't have anything to grab on. Whatever was there, it got taken. If it wasn't heavy enough or it's maybe under sand?
No, there is no sand there. It is a flat rock exactly because of that. Because the sand cannot deposit in that place because it's being blown away by the current. The same happened even with smaller and more efficient organisms like coral and algae. They cannot grab in the surface and grow because they are all the time being washed away. So this is a very unusual seabed. And this, in the beginning, I mean, it was really hard for us to explore that area because, as I said, we cannot grab on anything to stay in the same place. So we need to use the moment in which the tides change. When the incoming tide stops and before the outgoing tide starts, there we took those sometimes 35, 45 minutes to explore this area the best we could. And this area has another interesting feature, very interesting. It is full of holes that we call blowholes, but these are holes in the ground. I'm talking in the ground, it's a solid rock. But these are holes which are like chimneys, but really, really cylindric and really even, going down, I assume, till the center of the earth. Because these blowholes were made by, in the era of the volcanoes and the magma and the formation of the planet, all these gases came out through this liquid rock and made these blowholes, these chimneys. When the rock cooled down, it was just like a chimney that it goes, I don't know how deep. So these blowholes in this area, there's full of these blowholes. Obviously, there it was collected little rocks and sand, and the only sediment that you can find in this area is inside these blowholes. So, of course, that the same happened with the artifacts of the ships. Whatever was going around there with the current ended up in a blowhole and will never go out again. So we made a point in exploring these blowholes, trying to map them, how many they are. They were like more than 100, so it was quite difficult.
That's crazy. Isn't nature so interesting? The area that has crazy currents that doesn't allow sediment to settle, the pressures when the area was getting formed back in the day allowed it to have little deposit areas that were formed naturally. That's pretty, I just find it quite romantic or entertaining that those coincidences happen, which then end up giving a little bit of a flair to your job overall, at least to me.
It is certainly interesting because this, as archaeology and maritime archaeology, is obviously a multidisciplinary activity. You need help
Correct.
from everyone. I mean, when I'm talking about the blowholes, it's because I talk to geologists. This is not something I knew or that I really know. That is what they explained to me, why these chimneys were in that place and why it formed there. So being the only chances of collection of artifacts from any of the three wrecks in that area, well, these chimneys were like the natural collectors of artifacts. We made the point in checking on these chimneys of these blowholes. I'm laughing because we started finding gold inside these chimneys. Gold is very heavy. You know, gold is even heavier than lead. And when it's small, when are these like small discs of gold, like about half a kilo, a little bit more, half a kilo, 600 grams, it is small and it doesn't move that much. So whenever one piece of gold ended up in one of these blowholes, it stays there forever. And it's same for any other, even lighter artifacts that they were there. I will try to put a diagram that one of our team members made about the blowhole, so you can see the blowhole a little bit better explained than what I'm saying in words. We started exploring these blowholes and we started finding gold. In some of them, in quite a big quantity. So obviously, the entire plan of working only the 45 minutes between tides, that plan suddenly was discarded and we had to be there all the time. And that was, I'm laughing because for us was painful, but when you look at it from the years that has passed, remember this was the year 2000, we started exploring this area in 2001, so this many years ago. And when you look at it, it was really funny because we were trying to grab ourselves to whatever. And sometimes in these blowholes, you will find a little rock that seems very strongly attached to the seabed. You grab on that rock, you start excavating with the other hand and passing your metal detector, and suddenly the rock goes off because it was not that strongly attached to the seabed. And together with the rock, you go off at a very...
Yeah, the rock was good enough holding herself. you go and go hold on to it? She was like, nope. No,
Exactly.
thank you.
And I'm telling you, with the strong currents in the place and the shallowness of the place, because it was very shallow, when you go off there, you don't stop.
Adios.
And the guy in the Zodiac, who is always paying attention to that, you hear the engine every 10 minutes because the man has to go and pick one of us. One of us 300 meters away waving, oh man, take me back to my job. So, okay, we started finding gold and other artifacts in this blowhole. As I mentioned, it was very difficult to work there because of the current. But that gold in this wreck came in many shapes. There were a variety of artifacts. It's not only these impressive gold ingots like buns, like bread buns. It was not only those. There was pieces of jewelry. There was something like a crucifix. There were ornaments. There were plenty of beads from like necklaces, or because obviously they were not together in an object anymore. They were like loose. And you start finding these from very small pieces of gold to these big gold ingots. So it was not boring finding just gold ingots, but there were a variety of artifacts together with little pieces of objects, artifacts from a wreck. This area that I'm talking with the blowhole is, to make our life easier, is right in the middle of the three wrecks.
So it could have collected things from literally each of the three wrecks. You cannot determine just, oh God, of course it was in the middle.
Of course, this my way. It has to be in the middle. It couldn't be in a place that make it a little bit easier to understand. So it was in the very middle. And here we start managing the hypothesis of that this was smuggled gold. Why? First, because nobody would transport gold, this variety of objects together. I mean, if you're transporting ingots, you are transporting ingots. You will not put together heavy ingots with a delicate jewelry piece because one will destroy the other. So it really didn't make much sense. And at the time, also we realized that none of the ingots were marked. When you transport this type of values from India, let's say, to Portugal, because we assumed that there was a Portuguese ship because it was under the fortress of San Sebastián in Island of Mozambique. When you transport these sort of values, you have to mark them for your property, and also for tax issues. You have to pay tax to the crown for the richness that you bring from abroad to your country. So it was a practice that when you declare your gold, the gold will be marked with the fineness of the metal. So it will say which quality of gold you're transporting and to whom belong, and if you have already paid your tax. That will be all marked in the ingot itself.
So it's different marks, one for each thing, or the mark itself has all the information?
No, there are different marks. I mean, your property mark, you can use whatever you like. I mean, the shield of arms of your family, or your
initials,
or whatever. Yeah. The tax, normally it was like 2x, like 2 times the number 10 in Roman, because it's at the 20% that you already paid. And the finest, it comes, there are different ways, there are figures and there are numbers. There were different formats for the finest.
We have pictures that I can put a close-up here, right?
Yeah, well, not in this case because they were not marked, but we have other ingots that have this.
Exactly, of another rank, not these ones. Yeah.
In this one, so you have this situation in which none of the gold was marked. So imagine that you are not transporting across the ocean such a big value if you cannot demonstrate that it's yours. That was the first hint that we got from, well, this should be smuggled gold. And then it comes another one. We are talking about 3 wreck sites that are under the San Sebastián fortress in Island of Mozambique. I'm talking about less than 300 meters from the fortress itself. The San Sebastián fortress is the biggest fortress that the Portuguese built outside of Portugal. So you can imagine the amount of soldiers and workers and people in the fortress every day to have a wreck with gold right in the backyard. That doesn't happen. I mean, they were capable, they were able to rescue ships way far from the fortress, like miles from the fortress, using ships and their soldiers and divers and everyone to rescue their stuff. Imagine a wreck that is a stone throw away from the walls of the fortress. So, and the wreck, it doesn't just come, wreck there, and disappear overnight. These ships were there for years till they got destroyed and the wood got rotten. These ships were there for years. So it is very strange that in front of the fortress you will find this amount of gold and it was never recovered. Why nobody recovered that gold in the moment that they obviously recover everything from those ships? Well, the only reason that could be is that it was not declared. It's not in the cargo manifest, because if it would be in the cargo manifest, the people who will be rescuing the ship will be looking for that gold.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what your hypothesis was on why nobody went to investigate. Probably the ship, what was declared to be on the ship was not important, therefore nobody thought of double checking. Because as you mentioned, when a ship strands or wrecks, even today and more over back then, they don't have the speed and efficiency to take the ship right away from the coast. It will deteriorate. It will stay there for a couple of days. So regardless of anything, the human nature is curiosity. So nobody went to check out.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did, but in the nature of the smuggling is that you have it very well hidden.
Of course.
So it must have been in a place in the ship with very difficult access. So people will not just find it by chance. And
of course,
here it comes what it probably was, because this first ingot that was found within the ballast of one of the ballast piles, it meant or make us think that probably the person who had this bag or this little crate with gold, it would put it within the ballast. It will put it inside the ballast and cover it with ballast stones, right?
So you don't think it fell afterwards? It was already between the ballast.
Yeah, and then the wood of the crate or the canvas of the bag rotten away and the pieces were there and they were moved. And I mentioned in the beginning of the video why it was important to notice that this ingot was in the ballast of one of the ballast piles, because there was, for a moment when the appraisal of the Espadarte was made, experts, they put together the gold and the porcelain of the Espadarte and they gave this nice appraisal, this assessment of the value of the wreck. And I have always thought that actually it didn't come from the Espadarte but from that other wreck, because otherwise if would have come in the Espadarte, how did it ended up 35 meters away in the ballast of another ship? Why in the ballast? Because for that to happen, even if there is a big storm and the piece of gold will fly away or will be washed away for 50 meters and end up in another wreck, that wreck should have been there for more than 50 years already. So the wood of the ship would have disappeared, the ballast pile will be exposed on the seabed, and then this ingot will end up there. But we know the date in which the Espadarte sunk, which was 1558. If you put 50 years back, we are in 1508. I mean, almost a few years later than Vasco da Gama. I mean, that will be really unlikely to happen.
Probably as unlikely as an ingot of gold, one of the heaviest metals, to be flown away from one side to the other, I would assume.
Well, but weird things happen in shipwrecks, because...
Totally. You need to keep it in mind, but yeah, the probability is probably quite low.
We have seen dispersion fields in shipwrecks of miles, but those are like, for instance, a cannon or an anchor, which are objects that they don't move that much, but they could still be attached to a piece of wood that is floating away and it's sunk later on. Well, with the gold, if you find it in the context of the ballast pile of a wreck, must probably belong to this wreck. It's not coming from a wreck nearby. And on top of it, within the Espadarte context where all the porcelain was found, there was not one single piece of gold of any kind. So that also makes it a little bit more obvious that they don't belong to the Espadarte, that they belong to this other ship, which we don't know which ship it is. There are candidates in our historical research in the archive. There are like 5 or 6 ships. I cannot mention them all by heart, but there are like 5 or 6 ships that could have been the ships that were sunk right under the fortress. So I wanted to tell you this example of how you have to, in the archaeological investigation, how you have to take into account every single clue you can gather from either geography, geology, history, you name it, because you have also to put yourself a little bit in the shoes of the people at that time in that place and understand why, if they were capable to rescue and to recover things from a ship that was 5 miles away or 12 miles away, why they left such values down there in front of the fortress. They could have gone there every day or wait for the right day and the right sea conditions. They could have done that over the years, and they didn't because they were not looking for those objects. And obviously the person who hid the gold in the ballast, he would not come and say, hey, by the way, I have a bag of gold there that it hasn't been rescued. So that was a practice, let's say, in the Portuguese and the Spanish carriers, which are the fleets which I have studied the most. There was a lot of smuggling, there was a lot of contraband because people were out trying to avoid paying taxes. So that is a good example, and I wanted to share it with you because I find it interesting, and on top of it is gold. So gold is always attractive to people, and there are people who get even gold fever and trying to find some gold. So I hope you liked the video. If you like it and you came this far into the video, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, and let's keep on diving.